What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. I'm joined by the one and only Andy May. Andy, welcome to the show, dude.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. I'm glad to be here. I remember we talked about it a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago,
At
about doing a
ATA.
podcast. Yeah, and finally, here it is.
Yeah, finally, man. Dude, honestly, though, Andy, it's a great pleasure to have you on and to kick off this little KISS series that I plan on happening to dish out to everybody. It's just keeping things simple. That's the one thing, even last year, that I felt like my thing that I focused on was my shot and being in the moment and keeping it simple. And it kind of spoke for itself. And not that you talked it into an existence, but, that's why I'm excited to have you on, man, because you're a big believer in learning and being out there and experience these things. And
hmm
I'm sure, man, over the years you've kept things simple. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, I wish I could say I've always kept it simple, but sometimes I got to remind myself that too. It's easy to kind of over complex things sometimes, and get a little too deep in the weeds with certain parts of hunting. Sometimes that can lead to improvement, and sometimes that can just be a total waste of time, and you should be keeping it more simple. Yeah, I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone. I try to keep things simple, but everybody's brain is different and we think about things different. So I have to tell myself to kind of, just keep things simple sometimes so I don't drive myself nuts.
Yeah. Do you have that one friend that you could kind of either send a text message to or a phone call and they kind of slap you upside the head a little bit and be like, dude, quit overthinking this. Just get in there and kill this buck.
That's right. I do. I have a couple of friends like that. And yeah, we tend to do that for each other. It's funny, anybody can succumb to that, overthinking it, overanalyzing it. And then sometimes you just need to talk to that one friend that just kind of see things through, some simple glasses, and they're not emotionally invested in that deer or in that situation. And they can just, give you some common sense, and kind of bring you back down to earth.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I have like you said, I have a couple of those friends too, and it's just like, yeah, okay. And the best is though when you have the opportunity, when they kind of maybe have an idea too of like the lay of the land a little bit. Like if
hmm
you do like a scouting trip together, and knowing like that's if you're hunting in that spot, but you take someone with you, but they have like, hey, maybe remember this aspect of things, and if the wind's coming from this area, it's just so nice to have some buddies to rely on with that. But all right, Andy. Well, here's what we're going to do, man. To kick it off first, I want to know, just because, again, that we talked, like you mentioned, 3 years ago, I was said, hey, when we first met in person at ATA, working the tether booth together and everything like that, it would be cool I want to see how even things have evolved for you. And obviously listening to podcasts and watching videos that you're in, Andy, how would you describe your hunting philosophy now in like a couple sentences? And like, how has that changed maybe over the years for you?
My hunting philosophy. Well, I mean, it definitely changed. I mean, I think I always had this kind of strong eagerness to learn as much as I could. I even starting off, I wasn't really taught how to hunt by anybody, so I didn't really learn any style. I didn't learn any good things, but I also didn't learn any bad habits. So it was really just me. Although I had a couple of cousins that were into hunting, that kind of sparked my interest. But then I really just took off on my own. And I was definitely trying to, in the beginning, to shoot a few deer, but very quickly, like year 2 or year 3, I shot a nice buck, and then I became interested in shooting bigger bucks, older bucks. And back then, yeah, it might have been 2 or 3 year olds, and now, I'm kind of, took it up a notch, I guess. But it was all about just trying to get a good, solid, mature, semi-mature buck down in Michigan. That's all I really thought about. It was a very deep challenge. Once I started doing that with some regularity and started traveling to other states, because I would normally like tag out in Michigan, and then I wanted to keep hunting, so then I would start to venture off into other states, and I've been doing out of state hunting for 20 years. This is something I've been doing for a long time. And then I just quickly realized that, there's a lot of places and a lot of, varying types of terrain and habitat that I wasn't used to. And then I slowly kind of transitioned into just, okay, I want to become a better hunter. So I
Right.
started seeking out people that were doing better than me in certain areas. It seemed to have a skill set that I didn't have. And, I kind of adopted more of, I just want to become a better hunter. I want to become a more well-rounded hunter. I want to become that type of hunter that, we always talk about. You could drop him off anywhere and he could get on some deer and maybe even, take a nice antlered buck out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my hunting philosophy now. I don't really strive to have, 100 bucks on the wall, mounted. Like, I don't really care about that. And I don't think anybody really does care about that, to be honest with you. I mean, those things will end up in the trash one day. It's more, for me, it's just, how do I keep challenging myself so that I constantly feel like there's something that I'm trying to reach?
Yeah.
I could have a long time ago, 20 years ago, I could have just rested on my morals and just been like, you know what? I'm going to take 2 nice Michigan bucks a year and I'm going to do it the same, same 2 or 3 ways, hunt the same 2 or 3 areas. And I could have probably amassed a wall full of bucks just doing, a couple different styles, hunting the rut, sitting all day, getting in a funnel. But that, I that's just not how I am. It's just not how my brain works. Like, I don't like being stagnant, and I don't like feeling like, hey, I figured something out. I'm just going to ride this until my grave.
Mm-hmm.
I want to keep feeling like there's something just out of reach that if I work hard enough, I can obtain it. And when maybe that's mastering a new type of habitat or terrain, or not mastering, but just figuring it out to the point where I'm confident that I can go in there and kill a good buck. Well, when I've done that a few times, I kind of start to lose interest, even if it's a really good area and I feel like, man, there's giants in here and I can come back every year and maybe, have a chance at a 150 class buck. Like, I kind of lose interest. It's not that I don't want to hunt it anymore, but I just want to try something else. Or maybe I'll go to that area and I'll try a completely new tactic.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say my philosophy is constantly growing, constantly challenge myself to grow, and just becoming more versatile. Just
Right.
becoming a more versatile hunter that can, hunt just about anywhere, just about any time of the season, and get on deer. I think that's a great skill. And then when you
Mm-hmm.
can start doing it on some nice antlered buck, that's even a higher level skill. And when you can do that consistently on mature animals, it's arguably one of the toughest thing to do, is to be able to go anywhere and do that. And I'm certainly not there yet. I mean, I've done it, but there's still a lot of room to grow. Like, I know I've kind of built that reputation. It's because I've been traveling out of state. I've been killing, consistent, really good bucks in Michigan for over 25 years. No one wants to talk about my Michigan bucks, but really, that, to me, that's what I'm most proud of. Everyone wants to talk about my out of state bucks. And I've been traveling out of state for over 20 years. And I get it, because that's what most people, are doing and most people find challenging. But there's a lot of room. I have friends of mine that are really, really good at certain things or in certain areas. And I always, whenever I talk to them and I see their success, I'm always like, man, I was like, I felt like I was really starting to grasp this and do this well, or feel confident in this. And I was, I was taking bucks consistently, but I sometimes see these guys doing it in such a way or with such efficiency in an area that I don't live. I have this urge that's like, I want to be able to do that. And it's not
Right.
to outdo that guy. It's just like, that guy has something that I want.
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know. It's been my mindset as long as I can remember. And before hunting, it was something else, it's just the way my brain works. So my philosophy, again, is just constantly learning, constantly growing, and challenging myself, and not falling back and resting on a specific tactic that I can do every year and kill a mature buck, or a specific type of terrain or a specific property. I'm really not interested in that. That is
Yeah.
not my game at all. But there are guys that do that and they get really, really good at that. And that is a skill in itself.
Yeah.
That is a skill in itself. When, someone buys 200 acres and they develop it and they manage it, and now they're hunting it. They know it so intimately. They know, where the deer are bedding and when they're going to be where. And that's a skill in itself. And it's not as attractive to me, but I respect it.
Yeah, dude, I totally agree. And while you're saying all those different things about, going into different states and hunting, Michigan in particular too, for your home state, and doing it so well over the last, 20 plus years, like you were just saying, man, and getting on deer wherever, like you have multiple beautiful big mule deer as well down, you know what I mean? Like there's just people that, like you said, you're just able to get out there and experience. And man, I'm a big, obviously being in the teaching field as well, I'm a big proponent on telling these kids, especially because I'm at high school, you got to go through life experiences, right? Like you are going to get your nuts kicked in. You're going to get, those tough times to you. But those experiences are going to help you grow and become better. And hearing you say that, man, that's the one thing too here in the state of Pennsylvania, where I've hunted my whole life and gone out of state, and just having those other experiences where it's maybe different terrain, and I'm learning, like I mentioned to you prior about Ohio, that where I've hunted in Ohio is totally different from what I've grown to hunt for the last 20 plus years of my life as well here in the state of Pennsylvania. And man, it's tough, but I'll tell you what, I cannot wait already to go after it again next year, to continue to put myself out there and learn and understand why deer were doing what they were doing. And that's the beauty of hunting and trying to get after it.
That's right. Yeah. It's constantly challenging yourself. I just love going to a new state or a new property that I've never set foot on and trying to figure it out. And, honestly, I enjoy that. And, if the biggest deer I can find is a 3.5-year-old, 125-inch buck, I enjoy that process and getting opportunity at that buck, and say, 150 or 160-inch buck on a place that I know like the back of my hand. And, I kind of know the deer's there. I know they feed here. I know they bed here. It's not about the antler size for me. It's about the experience, and it's about the rewarding feeling that I feel after I do something. I love that feeling that I did something that was a little more challenging or a little more difficult that not everybody could do.
Yeah.
Not that everybody could kill a 150 or 160 off a property, but you get what I mean. I enjoy that type of hunting, that type of experience more. It's funny because I used to film a lot of my hunts, and I never posted them. I uploaded a lot of them to YouTube, but I always kept them as private because they weren't for anybody else. They were just for me. I would share them for my friends. I would kind of like halfway edit them, with free like Windows Movie Maker, like really bad. But I did this at the end of this one. I did a whole season, and at the end of the season, I found this like music that I don't know why, it just was like it spoke to me a little bit, and I plugged that in there, and then I started plugging in these little highlight videos of like a couple of deer that I killed, like walking up on them, and then a couple of the deer that I during the season out in the field, just like big bucks turning their heads, just really cool like little scenic video clips. And I said something in there, and I don't even remember saying this, but a few years ago, I rewatched that, and I was like, wow, even like, 10 years ago, this is the way I felt. But I said, the size of the buck doesn't matter, but the size of the experience does. And I said that, and in the whole thing just kind of flowed together really good. And it's like, man, that is so true. That right there speaks to exactly how I feel.
Yeah. Dude, that's why you doing what you are doing right now. It's easy to say you love it, and it's easy to see why you're doing what you're doing, man, and seeing that success. That's why, honestly, like from afar, I mean, obviously I really highly respect you. And I told you that 3 years ago when I met you along those lines, but it's I don't see how anybody could not think that about you, man. And saying that's pretty awesome to say. Like 10 years ago, that's exactly how you felt, and it's how you feel to this day. And, talking about your hunting philosophy, there you go right there, man. I mean, that's pinpoint. Yeah. That's friggin' awesome. Well, let's I like that, Andy. Let's kind of dive into this first question of keeping things simple. Obviously, we're in the dog days of summer. I'm sure by next week and after this episode actually finally airs in a couple weeks, so that then when we're recording it, we're going to get this crazy heat wave right now. I don't know if you looked into the future forecast. I'm sure you're going to get it as well. But how are you keeping things simple for this upcoming season? Well, I guess maybe you could talk about like where you're currently at in this process, like where you at on maybe scouting, like what you've done, where you maybe things left to kind of check some boxes, anything along those lines, like where you're planning a hunt, scouting process, anything specific gear wise that you're maybe trying to simplify, like kind of those little nitty gritty things. What are you doing right now to maybe simplify things come of this upcoming season?
Yeah. Well, as far as gear, I'm always trying to simplify that. I'm always trying to minimize what I take into the field, either in size, like bulk, or weight, in the way things function. I want things to be very smooth, not cumbersome. Everything has its place. I know how everything works perfectly. Everything is right where I need it, and it's only what I need, not extra. So I'm not I don't want to say I'm not a huge gear guy. I kind of am a big gear guy, but I don't go crazy with like building things and modifying things and trying this and trying that. I actually have friends, some of them that work at Tethered, that like they're really good at that, right? They geek out about that, and I usually just let those guys do that and then give me ideas,
Yeah.
But because I part of the reason I am successful, I think, is because I don't deep dive on that too much.
Right.
I think you guys can get lost on that, and they can waste a lot of time on gear and buying this and buying that and tweaking this and tweaking that when they could have been scouting all along or learning new ground or working on their shooting or whatever. So, but I'm always trying to downsize, like, if it's a pack, a pack that's more functional, that's smaller profile, more pockets but smaller profile, and it can, my system like straps in there or layers in there perfectly, that might be worth an upgrade. So I'm always kind of looking for things like that. As far as like a bow sight, like this year I've always enjoyed like a vertical pin. I used to, for years and years, a vertical single pin is what I used, a mover. And obviously that has its shortcomings. The positives are it's very accurate. There's not a lot of pin clutter, very open sight picture. Well, the last couple of years I've started using a multi vertical. So like a double pin vertical, which again is a little more functional. You got your 20 or 30 and then you can dial it down. Well, the more I experience like hunting bear, hunting mule deer, hunting axis deer, hunting elk, I'm really starting to see that, like, man, really, like, the simplest thing is to have a multi-pin. I mean, even though there's some negatives with it, and depending on what you value the most, you might do better with that. You might do better with a single pin. But like, I'm starting to value the keeping it simple, having my 20, having my 30, having my 40, having my 50, either a 3-pin. On one bow, I have a 3-pin horizontal. All 3 of them have individual pointers. It's the new HHA. And then it's a mover. So I can move it down, and then I could have my top pin might be 60, next one might be 72, whatever. But it's always 3 pins, and I always have 3 pointers. But if a deer steps inside of 40 yards, I don't have to move anything.
Right.
That's 99.9% of my whitetail hunting. And I don't have to worry about dialing. It makes those precious few seconds when you range a deer, you put your rangefinder down, or you just see a deer that's, he's right around 30 yards or whatever. I don't have to dial that down and waste 1 or 2 seconds, take my eyes off the deer. I can just grab my release, pull back. And those little precious seconds, after killing as many deer and shooting and missing and wounding and all this deer that I have over the years, like, those little seconds count.
Yep.
We don't think about those, but those really count. And those can sometimes make or break a nice, calm, relaxed shot. Or if you're messing around and that deer takes a few steps and he's walking out of the lane, it can turn that same shot into a very high anxiety rushed shot trying to get it off. So my other bow, I have the new option sight, and it has a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then you can, the option sight, if you're not familiar with it, you can, it's got a
like a window
multi-pin
opening. Yeah.
Yep, you can open that window and then it's a single pin, and I can dial that down to as far as I want. So that's going to be kind of like my Western sight. I'll hunt some mule deer with that. I might hunt some axis deer, you know. So I'm just something that over time, like, because I used to enjoy, I had target panic really bad for years, and I really enjoyed that single pin open sight picture. But I noticed that it was causing me some precious seconds, making me take a little more rush shot because I was dialing it down to, 27 or whatever it was. So I decided to simplify that this year. So there's a good example as far as like equipment. Same thing. Last couple of years I've hunted with a hinge release. I'm not recommending people do that, but for me personally, you would think that I'd be like super calm and smooth under pressure, but I'm not.
You're pulling through that, so you're like, bam, let's go.
Yeah, I still get jacked up, right? I still get jacked up, and my adrenaline goes. And although I don't punch the trigger anymore, what I found is that little moment where you draw back and you come to anchor and you start your aim and then you move to like your shot execution. I was rushing that little space there. And I wasn't punching the trigger, but I was aiming and executing a little too fast. Sometimes, just kind of rushing through the process.
You're forcing it.
Yep. So I went to a hinge release, and it kind of forces me to slow down, and I really like that. So will it cost me an animal eventually? Because it is a little bit more time. I draw, I anchor, I'm shooting a sweet spot, so I click a little safety off, and then I just aim and just relax my hand until it goes off. Will that cost me an opportunity? It might, but I can live with that because it's making me, it's forcing me to take a little bit more time, a little bit more focus, just be a little more relaxed through the shot, and I'm making better shots.
Yeah.
So
what was the other day I saw you posting too, something with shooting on your Instagram. You posted something. What was that too? Because that was like, to be completely honest, man, that was kind of the gear starter for me, getting the gears good turning. I was like, man, like just simple, because you like Jared Schaefer is a big, we'll talk a lot, and we just talk about how we want to just keep it simple. And like when you posted it, I was like, that's what I want to do, is have this, and and then that's when I was like, I want Andy on as the first guy. So you could even discuss about like what you were noticing while you were out shooting like that day.
Yeah, so I picked up on that a few years ago, and sometimes I have to remind myself to do it. But I was sighting in, I was just checking my marks. My bow was already sighted in, but the bow is a machine. The bow, this bow, things change with heat, with moisture, with elevation. If you're hunting in the mountains versus in the desert, like things change. So you should be, especially if you're a Western hunter where you're going to be taking extended shots, you should be checking your marks fairly regularly. And that's the way I do things. I draw a horizontal, or I have a horizontal tape, and I will that's how I check my distances. I don't really aim at a spot, but so I'll check my 20, my 30, my 40, my 50, all the way out to extreme long distances on a horizontal line. Make sure those are hitting. It's a little bit easier to aim at a line than it is at a circle. And then I'll check my left and rights with just a vertical line, not a cross, but just a vertical. So you just know, when your pin is floating on that line and your shot breaks, you kind of know, like, all right, it was in the middle. It was a little left of center. It was a little right of center. So that's what I was doing. But the point I made in that post was, sometimes when we're shooting at dots, like on a cube, I was shooting at a cube, and we put our pin in the dot, right? And the pin is kind of like floating around in this dot, and the dot is small, right? Even at 30, 40 yards, it's small, and our pin is moving, and it's coming out of the dot, and then it's coming out of the dot over here and out of the dot over here. And what that can lead to is like, you're almost kind of delaying your shot execution because you're really trying to like micro aim and like, man, it's got to stay in the dot. And then you get it to kind of like slow down and stay in the dot, and then you shoot. One, that can lead to target panic, but two, that micro aiming, what you're doing is you're creating a lot of tension in your hand and in your front shoulder, and it actually makes it worse. What I've learned to do is like on those cubes, especially at longer distances, like if you're shooting at 20 at a dot, that's not that hard to keep it in that dot. But you start getting back to 40, 50. That day I was shooting at 80. Um, and you're shooting at this little, 3-inch dot, it's impossible to keep it in it. So what I said that I did is like, I'm not aiming at the dot. I'm aiming at the cube. The dot's in the center, and I'm using the cube as essentially my dot. But I can keep that pin inside the cube, and when I allow it to aim at the cube, my pin is staying in the cube the whole time. It's not going outside of the cube. So what that does is that creates a calmness in me. My pin's not leaving my bullseye. It's inside of it. And I'm just staring at the cube. The pin is constantly recentering itself in the cube, and I'm executing my shot. Whereas if I was aiming at that little tiny dot, it's in, it's out, it's up, it's down, it's left, it's right, and I'm really trying to micro aim and really trying to like focus. And what I'm doing is I'm creating all kinds of tension in my hand and in my front shoulder, and it actually makes you miss. So that's all it was. Aim bigger to miss smaller. We've been taught to aim small, miss small, and probably on a bench rifle, that works. Essentially, and how does that translate into hunting? I'm not picking a little tiny spot that I'm trying to hold on. I am picking at a region, about the size of a basketball, and I'm letting my pin float in there. Now, my group will not be anywhere close to the size of that basketball. That's just my region. That's my cube.
I like that. Yeah.
The arrow they'll go in there like this because I'm giving myself a little bit of cushion for my float. And because my pin is never leaving that area. That's calming. That's relaxing. That's a nice sight picture to know that your pin is never leaving that.
Yeah.
That creates less anxiety, less tension, more accuracy.
That's huge. And that's exactly what I just went through this past weekend. Catch you up to speed, Andy. So this past May, I did like my first competition ASA event. I came in second. And then this past weekend, I did a Pennsylvania, kind of like a try kind of little area, another archery competition, and I sucked. Like I got in my head big time. And when you're going, it even goes back to the whole vertical horizontal thing. Like when at my ASA event, I was able to use in that new bow hunter class, I was able to move my dial, even though I thought I could not. So I was running a horizontal 3-pin. And normally I'm the same way. I like the vertical, especially running the 2, same thing, HHA. And so for this one, I was moving my dial for the ASA, came in second place, shot great, really no anxiety, just basic common nerves for competing against other individuals. This past weekend, same thing, but this one was in a bow hunter class, and the guy who puts it on is strictly do not move your pins, blah, blah, blah. And dude, I sucked. Like there was one I pre-shot, didn't mean to, haven't had that happen to me in like a year and a half, 2 years. And another time I thought I finally was calming myself down. So after that one though, I will say this, I did shoot IBO target for an 11. So I came through, I muscled through my mind on that one. But then later on again, kind of struggled to wrap it up, and I got a really good shot execution. And my arrow broke, or when I heard it go dong and like bounced off a tree, and I was about a foot under, and I for sure used that top pin when I should have been using my bottom pin basically. And it just mentally, and I couldn't have been more mad at myself, but then at the same time I was like, well, at least that was a great shot execution. So now my final 2 targets, let's get some points back and just see where the hell I ended up. But yeah, it for me, dude, that horizontal just sucks. I just, for right now, I'm the same way. I do like a vertical pin, but like you said, if you practice, and that's why the point of it, if you're able to keep it simple and, you're able to do that, whatever works for you, that's the key.
Yeah. And, to some people that might be more complex. Some people get really wound up at crunch time, and they will do exactly what you did and use the wrong pin. And I'm not saying that might not that could happen to me, and I might be like, shoot, I'm going back to a single pin. That was part of the reason, and it's a big reason why a lot of guys use a single pin. Tony
Yeah.
Peterson uses a single pin. Mark Kenyon uses a single pin now because of that. Because they want that simplicity of just one pin. Hey, I'm not shooting past 25 yards or 30 yards. I'm going to set this thing at 25 and I'm aiming, behind the shoulder. And that is great. For me, though, I'm not just hunting whitetail.
Right.
I hunt antelope. I hunt axis deer. I hunted coos deer last year. I've hunted javelina, mule deer. I'm going to be going on more elk hunts. Some of these critters, it's a stretch to get inside 60 yards. So you have to be proficient at longer ranges if you want to fill your tag regularly, or you can keep it to close shots, but you just might not have as many opportunities. I like the fact that, hey, if I train, if I work hard, if I practice, if I improve, I can shoot further distances accurately. I like that it's not an easy button like a crossbow.
Right.
Like, no, if you put in the work, you practice, you do some realistic practice, yeah, you can shoot an animal at 50 or 60, when the conditions are right. I like that because my hard work pays off. So that 5 pin, that 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 is really nice in the mule deer world where, you're stalking in on an animal and you get to, 58 and your pins are set and you're not dialing, you're not taking your eyes off. Or 60 and in, essentially you don't have to touch your pin, and that's a lot of shots. That saves me a few of those moments. But you're right, I have got to make sure that I have to focus and make sure I'm not using my wrong pin. Whereas like, a single pin, you're going in there, you might get wound up and forget to adjust your dial. I mean, it could go both ways. But in the whitetail world, I think a single pin makes a lot of sense. Or at least a double vertical makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because very few guys are really killing them even past 30,
Yep.
So it makes a lot of sense. If you're strictly a whitetail guy, don't necessarily do what I'm doing. I'm thinking in terms of a lot of different species that are a lot tougher to get in bow range of. So there's that,
Yeah, no doubt about it. So anything else for this summer process? Is any more summer chores where you're trying to simplify things for yourself?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I did all my postseason scouting, which I think is pretty simple. It's the basics that we all know that we should do. I did that. I felt like I was pretty thorough. Walked a lot of the ground that I'm familiar with, walked some new ground, found some new stuff, verified some stuff. Just kind of the basics that I do every year, kind of around home, Michigan, Ohio. And, the last month or so, obviously there was turkey season thrown in there, but I've been doing a lot of archery. I work out year round, but I've been doing a lot more, kind of changing up my workout as I age for more joint health, flexibility, stability, staying flexible, staying pain free. I have a lot of things that I'm kind of nursing and just trying to keep in good health. And the only reason, I mean, yes, I want to be healthy. Yes, I want to stay in shape, but my motivation is to be able to bow hunt as long as I can. That's it. And I want to bow hunt in the mountains. I don't think of it as like, okay, I want to whitetail hunt till I'm 70. No, I want to be doing high country hunts when I'm 70. I want to be doing elk hunts when I'm 70. That's my goal. That's my vision. And I may not be able to, but that's my motivation. It's keeping me young because I'm looking it through the eyes of more of like an extreme or somewhat extreme Western type hunter.
Right.
So I'm preparing myself for that. So I'm kind of overly prepared for whitetail hunting, like in the whitetail world, like, oh, I walked a mile in, like
Yeah.
I hear that and I'm like, yeah, I mean, that is far in the whitetail world, like a mile into the marsh or a mile into the hills. It's far, but that's not hard.
Right.
That's not hard. I
Yeah.
mean, we do 12 miles a day in Colorado, and you're going up the steepest, you're on a Stairmaster for 9 hours, essentially, at high elevation with with a lack of oxygen. So I think of it in terms of that. But yeah, a lot of archery right now. I've actually normally I'm doing a lot of testing and tweaking now, but I kind of got that done,
That's
and
good.
I am dialed in with 2 setups. I'm confident in them. I'm not changing anything. And I'm just the rest of the summer, I'm just going to be doing a lot of realistic practice. I told myself, I have a little chalkboard in my archery room, and after the season, I kind of analyze how it went, and I write a few things down that like these need to change or I need to work on these. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things is I need better shot selection because I practice a lot. I'm shooting 80, 90, 100, 120 yards routinely in my backyard. That can almost give you a little bit like a sense of overconfidence.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because when you
Mm-hmm.
can lay them in there, like today, I was shooting earlier. I was shooting so good. I was shooting like a baseball size at 100 yards, just dropping them in there. Boom, boom, throw a broadhead on, boom, right in there. It's just like it felt so good. You can take that confidence, and then all of a sudden, you see a whitetail out there at 50, and yeah, I'm gonna sneak it through there. Like I feel that confidence because
Mm-hmm.
I know I can make that shot, but I also need to realize like I can make that shot on flat ground when there's no adrenaline on a target that's not moving.
Yeah.
you know, um, a lot of things can go wrong in the woods, and like I said earlier, I still get jacked up. So I need better shot selection. Um, not that I'm making a shot like that all the time, but just be a little more patient with angles. Be a little more patient slowing that process down. Like I said, with the hinge, it helps me. I put slow my process down, slow it down a little bit when I get to full draw. Just take that extra second. That extra
Mm-hmm.
second sometimes is the difference between wounding an animal,
Yeah.
missing, or putting that perfect shot on. Just letting that pin sit there an extra second and then
Mm-hmm.
execute your shot. A lot of guys rush through that window really quick, and I can do that sometimes too. So those are a couple of things that I had written down. So I'm working on those. I'm working
Yeah.
on those in the backyard now. I'm picturing. Oh, the other one was lowering my, practice lowering my heart rate. So what I'm doing is I'm actually visualizing. I'm on my knees and I'm in the backyard, and I'm shooting through a little opening between some of the vegetation and stuff that I have. I have a bunch of woods around my house, so I can kind of get up on these hills and shoot down into my yard. I'll be on my knees, or I'll be kind of like 1 foot higher than the other, and I'm waiting, and I'm visualizing, literally visualizing like a big mule deer coming down off the hill. And I'm actually making myself get nervous. I'm
Mm-hmm.
visualizing. I'm like, I'm breathing heavy. I'm breathing heavy. I'm going through trying to make it as realistic as possible. And then I'm trying to relax myself. I'm actually practicing that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll start breathing, 3 in, 3 out, lowering that heart rate, 3 in, 3 out. And I'll practice that. And then I'll draw back, and I'll have a 3D target down there, and I will put that pin on there, and I will wait to start my execution until that pin really settles. And it's not the same as shooting at a live animal. It's actually a little harder than not doing that, going through that
Yeah.
that visualization, because I pull back and I'm like, man, this is it. This is it. Like, make a good shot, focus, and then I'll pull back and I'll let that pin float on there, and it's like dancing all around like it's a real animal, and I'm like, okay, I'm forcing myself, okay, settle, and I'm just giving myself that extra second or two, and that pin starts to settle. All right, just there's aim at the cube or aim at the basketball or just aim at that region. I don't think about that, but I'm like, okay, aim at that region. All right, and all of a sudden my pin slows down. Then I start to execute my shot, and I'm just getting in the habit of doing that,
Yeah.
because what we do a lot of times in the backyard is, we range, okay, 40, draw back, put the pin on, and finger on the trigger and pull, 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 boom. And we'll shoot 20 shots like that. Finger on the trigger, pull, 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 boom. What you're doing is you're practicing the same tempo, the same process every time. And that's not how hunting works.
Right.
How often do a deer steps out and you draw back and it's like, there he is, and finger on the trigger and pull, 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 boom. Yes, sometimes it happens like that, but
Not
sometimes
very
you draw
often.
back and he turns and looks at you, or he turns and faces straight away, and now you're at full draw for 45 seconds. So you should practice that sometimes, because that's realistic. And it's also not realistic to stand on flat ground with 2 feet and shoot at 30, 40, 50, 60 yards. When's the last time you killed a whitetail standing straight up on flat ground with your feet shoulder width apart? But that's how we practice 99% of the time, right?
Yeah, it's
We've
bizarre.
mastered that shot, but it's a
Yep.
shot we don't see in the woods. So my realistic practice is that it's in a saddle, it's on my roof, it's in a tree stand, it's on my knees, it's with 1 foot up and 1 foot down, because that's the shots that I get when I'm out west. I'm on one knee, I'm hunched down, peeking through the grass, trying to get a range through the grass, come to full draw, and then I sit up. Those are the shots that I've gotten. My mule deer shots,
Well,
I've
that
been
one
on.
wasn't that one like last year, the year prior, wasn't that like a real crazy, like you were up on that one, like a hilltop basically, and you shot
Yeah,
way down on that mule deer?
Wyoming.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was in
Wyoming.
Wyoming. That was a very steep, wind was howling, and I actually drew back on that deer, and I had kind of jogged, like, I don't know how far it was. It was a half mile, maybe a big loop to get downwind, and I peeked up over the ridge top, and there he was down there feeding, and my heart rate was really high. I came to full draw. I put my pin on it, and I could not settle my pin. I could not. My heart rate was going, dude. I was so nervous. This was my first mule deer. I let down. I literally let down. I was like, I am not releasing an arrow like that. So I took about 10 seconds, and I just breathed in, out, in, out. He was down there feeding. He wasn't on alert. I had the time. I drew back slow. I dropped that pin down. I settled on it. I gave myself a split second. I was using a thumb button at the time, and I just let it float. And I just think to myself, aim, aim. And once I start saying aim, 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 that's when I gradually start pulling, pull, 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 boom. And I actually released a perfect arrow. What I didn't account for enough was, I told you how windy it was. It blew my arrow about 6 inches back, end up hitting him in the liver. He took off, watched him bed down again, one more time, and I snuck in and got another arrow in him. Yeah, they're never flat-footed. I've shot 2 on my knees, 1 on my butt, 1 crouched. I shot my first antelope buck on my knees at, long, but I had practiced that shot. I didn't draw my bow back thinking, man, I hope I hit this. Like, I knew I would hit this.
Yeah.
Even though I know that I very well could miss. Like, antelope, they tend to lunge, forward. But he was so far. But it was a calm day. I had made that shot a million times in my backyard. That confidence was there. There was no hesitation. But it's bow hunting. I'm realistic in that. But so yeah, I try to replicate that. And last year, what I noticed, like, I got to get better at lowering my heart rate. I got to put a little more time into practicing that, and just taking that split extra second when I come to full draw, just that second, just that second. So I'm not rushing through that part of my process. Because a lot of times what I would do is I would start executing before my pin was really settled. It was in there and it was floating, but the adrenaline's going, the tension's a little high. Just give yourself a second. Let that pin just calm down a little. You're going to make a way better shot. And that's hard to do. So that's why I'm practicing it.
Yeah. And it's important, like what you said, we're talking about keeping things simple. It's as simple as getting to, if you have a bag target, if you have a cube target, if you have a 3D target, throw them at all different types of angles in your backyard. And one of the things that I used to do a lot is just, if I was shooting, say, a half a dozen arrows, just throw them. It's just wherever they land, that's what you have to shoot. That's where you're shooting from. And like you said, maybe shoot one from your knees and anything along those lines. That it really helps. And some of my better years, yeah, I did the postseason scouting, but man, it's this summer and the spring and summertime of really dialing in my shots and doing all the different angle shots. Like, that's the beauty of saddle hunting too, man. Like, obviously with tethered, and you could be 4 feet off the ground, 1 stick high, and put that platform up. You could still replicate a decent amount of a little bit of an angle, but you're getting that process of knee into the tree. Here's your weak side shot. Here's your drop shot, and getting that actual practice like that. It's critical, and man, it does pay off. And that's as simple as it gets, is practicing shooting your bow in hunting situations.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we're hunters. We're not target shooters. Now, I'm a big fan of shooting on flat ground when you're checking your marks, you're sighting your bow in, you're testing stuff. I want no wind. I want flat. I want big targets. I'm testing broadhead flight. I'm testing, vein configuration. I'm testing a new bow or whatever. Yeah, I want it. I want everything as standard as possible. And then when I settle in on a setup, that's when I transition into the more realistic practice. And you talked about shooting out of a saddle. You can shoot very accurately out of a saddle. You can,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the same. You need to practice. Like you said, you can stabilize by getting your knees into the tree, or some angles even your hip into the tree, and that gives you a little more stability. But just even leaning out into the saddle and shooting. If you're not used to shooting like that, you are going to be a little less steady. It
Yeah.
takes practice.
Yeah.
Just like if you're a tree stand hunter, you should be shooting from an elevated position if that's the way you're going to be hunting the majority of the time. So, yeah, I shoot well out of the saddle is because I practice out of the saddle. I had a couple of friends when tethered first started pick up a few saddles, and within 3 weeks they're like, I can't shoot out of that thing. They shot out of it once or twice, and they couldn't shoot 60 yards like they could off flat ground. Well, no, I mean, it is different. It is different. It does take some practice. It'd be like shooting off of a bench rest with a rifle, with a good gun support, versus you know shooting it with just a front support, and
Mm-hmm.
you're supporting the rear, or freehand. Like, you could shoot good freehand if you practice a lot freehand.
Right.
So it's just like anything else. You got to practice. But that would be the biggest takeaway with that, is just, we're hunters, and think about the shots and the way your body is contorted, where your feet are, where your hips and your shoulders are in alignment on some of these shots that we have to make out of the tree. Like last year, I shot one. Um, it was weak side, and I stood up on my platform with the rope, the tether over my shoulder, like back to the tree, like on a traditional stand. I made that maneuver, but I could do that smooth,
Mm-hmm.
without getting picked off, because I had practiced it a lot. So that was one of my shots. I made another shot from my knees, on the ground, a spot and stalk, basically whitetail hunt. So they're all different. In a lot of those ones up in the tree, it's very rarely, unless you're hunting like sometimes like on a private property or something, and you kind of have like dedicated food sources and travel routes and stuff, then you can maybe set up a preset where, like, very likely I'm going to be able to shoot off my left side sitting down. I mean,
Right.
that's a very good tactic in a very controlled situation like that. But when you're DIY, hunting, and you're setting up on the fly, and you're hunting public land, or you're hunting, private land where other people are hunting, it's essentially public. You're moving and you're grooving, and you're always kind of finding new areas and new setups. You have to, because you have to stay ahead of the game, and you just never know what kind of tree or setup, or exactly where those deer are going to come in, and you might often be in an odd, contorted situation where your form is off. And when your form is off, essentially what you're doing is, I mean, you're hunching down, or you're
Yep.
whatever. You're kind of like, almost like taking your bow out of tune, because you're changing your form. You need
Yeah.
to practice those. You need to know what your bow does, and you need to be able to, like, okay, if I do this, I'm a little more steady. Or if, I've done this 50 times in my backyard, this is no big deal. You just repetition, and eventually, a lot of those things just become second nature.
Yeah, my buddy Tanner, he we just shot at that local course, and he shoots kind of on the tour a little bit. And he asked me, he goes, taken away from it, how do you think your bow performed during your stressful times? And I'm thinking to myself, well, if I messed up, it was mainly me. But he was just like, well, yeah, but if you are pushing a little bit more harder on the back wall, or doing something a little, jerking a little bit, how forgiving was your bow and all that type of stuff. So it's like you said, you might be in that little wonky position, make
Mhm.
sure, like you said, but you might have to cant a certain way of your body, and making sure that your bubble's still level, and you're bending a little bit at the hips, make sure that that shot is going to go where you want it to go. I like that.
Mhm. You mentioned, I'm kind of shocked at there's, I mean, a lot of the new sites, most of the new sites have a bubble level, but I see some guys that are still using like sites that
Don't
maybe,
have third access.
yeah, or even an adjustable second axis, so yeah, there's a bubble on there, but it might not really be level with when your bow is vertical. And if you have like, I could take my bow right now, everything is leveled perfectly, and I can go to 50 yards or just say 30 yards. And if I take my bow and just tilt it so the bubble is all the way to one side, dude, I'll miss by 8 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that reference, like, it's insane. It's
Yeah.
insane. Like, that's the difference between a big time gut shot or a shoulder hit.
Yeah.
So, that's important. The more that bow is off level, it can really throw that arrow off. And then you add some distance to that. I mean, you're talking big time misses. So, something to keep in mind there. Some of these sites have gotten really complex, a lot of adjustment, but it's really because we've learned, like, hey, this is this is really important if you want to be able to hit what you're aiming at. So good.
And it's the one thing that you mentioned even earlier. You said this word, and it's the word that I would say the last 2 years, after hearing you mention about it, I really tried to make what does that mean to me, basically. And that was to become a more efficient hunter. When you look at it, and I want to keep it to, let's even keep it for the state of Michigan. Let's keep it to this. If you're listening in the state of Indiana, keep it to the state of Indiana, like your kind of your home woods, right? Like it's the places where you're stomping, like you even said, maybe some ground that like the back of your hand, and some ground that you're learning to get there. Let's discuss like what kind of steps to simplify things that can make you a more efficient hunter. Like kind of going, so for me, I'll even throw this out there. For me, last year, I did a lot more of postseason scouting, understanding and using the historical data that went with it prior, and then diving in there, knowing a little bit more and knowing when to kind of strike for this last season, if that makes sense. And that's where I was most effective. I mean, my first 6 hunts, let me rephrase that. My first 7 hunts, I had 5 deer down in the state of PA. I never had that before. And I think a lot of that was because I was more efficient. I was more calculated. So you tie into the historical data for me, number one, and number two, that postseason scouting. And then number three, knowing when to strike. So those 3 things, I believe, made me a more of an efficient hunter last year. So when you look at, and I was obviously here in the state of Pennsylvania, when you look at that for you, Andy, and how you've been so successful over the last couple years, and for a very long time, I should say, what are some of those things that made you an efficient hunter that now you've even simplified even further?
Yeah, well, a lot of those same things. One, that we should touch on real quick is just being able to make the shot. There's a lot of really good hunters out there. I mean, we watch them on YouTube. We know them. We have friends. They're great hunters. They get shots at mature animals every year, and half the time they screw it up. It's a tough thing for a lot of people. That's why so many guys went to a crossbow as soon as it becomes legal. My best friend did that. Like, he just kept missing and wounding big bucks, and he's just like, screw this.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to make the shot consistently. That requires, for a lot of people, work. I won't dive too deep into that. We already talked about that a little bit. One thing for sure was historical data. 2 ways. One is if you say you are lucky enough to have a buck that survived the hunting season, survived the winter, and he's the buck you want to go after next year. Being able to pull historical data like trail cam pictures, where his sign was, visual sightings, some of the things that he did, some of the travel areas that he went through, maybe where he was feeding at certain times of the year, maybe where he was bedding, through scouting, seeing him come out of certain areas, just being able to put those pieces together a little bit and sort of build somewhat of a historical database on this buck. That's a huge advantage in being able to be efficient in hunting that buck. Now at least somewhat that he's in this area during this time, or he likes to bed in this general area, all of a sudden you're starting to really zero in on when and where is most optimal to take that buck. But that takes experience, and that takes a lot of detective work, and not all of us are lucky to have that. Even me, rarely in Michigan do I get like multiple years of history of a buck. Like sometimes I'll get 2 years.
Yeah.
Like last year he was 3, or last year he was 4, and I either hunted him or I just kept cameras out there, and I went in postseason, found some sign where I thought he was bedding. It looked like he was coming through here, bedding here, and then I start to put the pieces together. But there's some people that have that quite a bit. Like some of the guys in PA, Bo Martonic, Johnny Stewart, there's bucks that they follow for 3, 4, 5 years on public land. So it's out there. So that's one way. And then the other way is just historical data in a given area. Maybe you're not after a particular buck, but you're hunting and learning a specific area, and you're starting to learn the tendencies of that area. That's Sometimes I use it for individual bucks. Like this year, hopefully, if he made it, a buck down in Ohio, I have a couple years of history with, and I got a lot of data that will help me, get on this deer. But a lot of times, there is no specific buck I'm after. It's more, I'm hunting an area that's decent, and typically there's some deer in the
Good
area,
bucks.
some bucks in the area that I'd be happy shooting. So I'm gonna obviously, if I have historical data from that, go back and really learn that. Look through my journal, look through my trail cam pictures. When did bucks start showing up? When did they start hitting, this scrape? Or when do they really start coming into this area that was predominantly does, like in this marsh? There's an area that I can think of offhand, and it's a phenomenal area for Michigan, in that the habitat is diverse. There's great cover for deer to reach older age. There's food. There's high concentrations of deer. The problem is that just everybody knows it, so the hunting pressure is out of this world. So very rarely do you get like older bucks, but occasionally, one slips through the cracks. That area, at the beginning of the season, at least where the areas where I can hunt, it's just all does and young bucks, and you could waste 2 weeks out there hunting and bouncing around. I'm not saying there would never be a mature buck, but very rarely. I mean, what I've learned over the last, 20 some years is like, if you just let that go, let that be, right around that third week of October, early November, and then you slip in there and you start sitting all day in some funnels, you're gonna get a crack at a good one. You will get a crack at a good one if you hunt these areas with this wind during this time, and you put your time in the tree. And there's a lot of areas around across multiple states that I've learned that over the years, but that takes time. It takes time. You need to hunt it. You need to run cameras on it. You need to, observe some things before you start to build that. You can estimate that the better you get at kind of, or the more that you figure it out in different types of terrain, you can kind of estimate that now when you go in and scout, and just by the way the sign lays, like, okay, there's probably not any mature bucks bedding in here. I'm not finding any beds, not finding any, rub lines going back to bedding areas. I'm not finding any clusters of rubs in a likely bedding area. It's more scattered rubs. I'm finding a lot of doe droppings. I'm finding a lot of doe bedding, a lot of doe tracks. The rut signs, the rubs and the scrapes seem more spread out. That would tell me, like, there's probably not a buck living in here right here during the beginning of the season,
Right.
or mid-October. It probably is a spot that's going to heat up later. The doe sign is incredible. There's good doe numbers. There's doe droppings, and there's rubs, but it's kind of concentrated around these doe bedding areas and around these feeding areas, and along doe travel. And there's scrapes, like kind of where all the doe trails come and meet together. That starts to paint a picture to me like this is probably more of a rut spot.
Yeah.
So, and I could figure that out or estimate that without actually hunting it. And I'm getting better at that, as opposed to, you're scouting, a marsh or wherever, and you walk into an island. It's like, there's a big bed right there. There's several rubs on the island. historical rubs. There's rubs that, are 3 years old that are completely blackened over. There's rubs from last year. There's rubs from, this previous year. There's 2 or 3 beds. They're big mature beds. Okay. Yeah, obviously that's a big mature buck bedding area. Like I'm going to be hunting. It's worn to the ground. And if it's worn to the ground, what's that tell you? He's spending a lot of
Fair.
time there. What what
Mm-hmm.
what what time is it? What time of the season is he most likely using this repetitively? It's probably going to be in that early October, late summer, early October, early season through mid October. And then he's going to start changing his mind to that other area that has the sporadic sign kind of all over with all the doe sign, because he's going to be doing something different. So that it kind of gives me an estimation of, hey, when should I target this? Then I would look at it and be like, okay, this sets up for a great, he's probably using it, on this wind. Well, okay, there's this bed facing this way. There's this bed facing this way. There's this bed facing this way. I think he's bouncing around, changing beds when the wind is shifting. So that tells me, and he's using this on 2, 3, maybe even any wind. This is the bed that I want to hunt, and I'm going to hunt it during that time of year when I got one of those winds. I'm going to approach where I think I can get in and try to set up undetected and get him moving. Probably wait till a little bit of a cold snap. Those things, all those things, I'm putting a puzzle piece together with no historical data, and you can do that. And
Yeah.
I've gotten quite good at that. But historical data, man, as far as efficiency, is huge. What was the other thing you said?
So I use efficiency as far as that goes of historical data. I use like really like, and you kind of even alluded to it there, is of like knowing when to strike. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like,
Yep.
like that was the other key thing for me, was, and that's exactly what you were saying. Like I knew, hey, those first 2 weeks in this spot, it's kind of pointless for me to go in there, because if I see any bucks, it's going to be young bucks of forkers, spikers, and does running around. And I know at that 18th through 23rd time, that's when some of the older does, for whatever reason, come into heat. And around Halloween, it's like a light switch goes off, and it's just like mayhem.
Yep.
And then the other thing was that postseason scouting. So those three things are, for me, what I thought kind of helped me become a little bit more efficient last year.
Yeah, that postseason scouting, when you find areas that were clearly hot during the rut, that can lead towards efficient rut hunting. You find spots like that, you're like, all right, this was a great rut spot. This is torn up in here. I'm going to put in some time here next rut. The rut's short. The rut is
Mm-hmm.
2, maybe 3 weeks. So you can be efficient with that. You go into that area. There was multiple, lots of different types of buck sign in there, rubs, scrapes all over the place, torn up, big rubs, small rubs, lots of doe traffic. You're like, this is going to be a hot spot. Well, all of a sudden you've increased your efficiency, you're increased your opportunity to chance at a good one just by finding that through scouting. And it's not everywhere.
Right.
But with the one thing you said about kind of like making that sit count, or striking when that iron is hot there, it's like that can be just the way I explained it, why, with historical data and kind of knowing when to go in there. But there's a lot of times where I'm not hunting familiar areas, or I'm hunting areas that are new to me, or I get tuned into a buck in a certain area that I'm not as
Mm-hmm.
familiar with, or maybe I'm just going into an area that I've never set foot on. So a lot of things can trigger that for me, that like right now is the time. And it could be as simple as I go in and I check a camera on a scrape, and boom, there's a buck that's been on the scrape 3 of the last 7 nights. you know yeah, like get in there and hunt that scrape,
Mm-hmm.
because even though he's just on at 3, he's probably in that area every night, because those cameras do miss things. So it could be
Absolutely.
something like that. It could be I go in and I'm scouting a place midday, and I'm walking a transition edge. I know bedding is all, kind of varies over here, kind of feeding is over here. I'm walking that transition edge, and all of a sudden I start getting on hot sign. You know, it's just all of a sudden it's like rubs are popping up, scrapes are popping up. It's like they're concentrated here, like a deer's traveling through here. Yeah, man, that's telling me like right now is the time. So I look for it could be that. It could be you're hunting over here and you glass something across the marsh, and it's like a big buck coming out of an island over there. Like boom, I'm over there the next day. So a lot of my quick kills come from that, like of some sort of verification, an observation, a glass, or just a glassing session. I do that a lot, especially in more open areas. I'm actually looking for a buck that I want to pursue, and then I'll find them, and then I'll go hunt them, as opposed to just hunting and kind of just getting up in a tree and like, oh, maybe there's one in here. So I don't really do that anymore. I
Yeah.
used to do that more, but now yeah, outside of the rut, like that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that type of verification that triggers that confidence in me that like I can get this thing killed. And
Yeah.
usually when I find that, I see a visual, I see the sign, I get a picture, I can get that deer killed in 3 days, or I don't kill him.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
Usually I can get him killed in 3 days, or 4 days, or I don't kill him at all. And that's usually how it goes. And that's how a lot of times, like, you might see me post like, oh, I went out of state, it was 3-day hunt or whatever. I killed him on day 3 or day 2. That's how I'm doing it. That's how I'm doing it. I'm observing, or I'm glassing, picking one up and moving in. And that could be a 125-inch deer. And I'm like, yeah, man, I've never been here before. That's a great buck. That's still a great buck to me. I'm happy with that. I got 4 days, I'm
Yeah.
happy with that. And I'll go try to get him killed. And it could be, somewhere else where, hey, I know there's 140, 150-inch deer in here. And, I might not even take a second look at that type of deer. And I might be looking for something else and spend time looking for it.
Right.
So it's a variety of ways to trigger that confidence in me. And every year I run into it all one way or another. And that's when I move in with confidence. And if I don't have that, I'm searching for it.
Yeah.
If I don't have that, I'm not sitting. I might get in an observation stand. I'm not saying I would never get in an observation stand where I can see a whole marsh or like a bunch of fields or a bunch of CRP ground or whatever, somewhere where I can get high and get a good vantage and observe a lot. I'm not saying I would never do that. I definitely would do that. But a lot of times I'm just going out and I'm going to check some cameras, move some cameras around. I might take my bow and my saddle and I'm scouting, and I'm going out intending for it to be a scouting session, and I might run into something that's red hot and I'm like, oh, this needs to be hunted right now.
Yep.
So that happens to me all the time, and I've killed so many times doing that. And I could go in. I'm going to go in here, and when I find something that I like, I'm going to set up, and I might walk all through that area and never find it, and I just go back to the truck.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna.
Just to sit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have that time and that luxury. I don't get to hunt a lot. I have friends that are straight killers and they hunt a lot. They can burn out some of those sits and just kind of sit and waste a few hunts. But I have to pick them much more carefully. So I wait till I have a high level of confidence. I always say like a 50 or 60% chance. I feel like a 50 or 60% chance that I can get this buck killed. If I feel that, I'll hunt it.
Yeah.
But that's
Dude.
outside the rut. Now,
Yeah.
during the rut, I have a little bit different mindset. Like, I realize I can be in a great spot, but I might have to just put in time. So I'm not afraid to sit. I haven't done it in some years, but there's been times when I had more time available and I'd sit, 6 or 7 days straight, dark to dark. I could do it. I have the discipline to do that. And I will do that again someday. And sometimes that's just what it takes to be a good rut hunter. That's why it's very frustrating for some people. The people that it's frustrating for, they're not very patient, and they'll go out and they'll hunt till 9 or 10. They get down and they hunt, come back out at 5 and they'll hunt till 8. The good rut hunters, they find the good spots and they put in the time. They do, and that's what it's all about during the rut. I'm not as efficient during the rut. I'm still efficient, but I'm not as efficient like, oh, it's going to happen today. Like, I don't really know when it's going to happen, but I'm putting
Yeah.
myself in good areas through scouting, through historical data, through past experiences that it's typically good. Or I'm after a certain buck and I've learned that, during the rut, he's in this area. I might pick 1 or 2 funnels that he goes through every so often, and I might just sit. And I've killed a handful of bucks that were target bucks over the last few years doing just that. Like, I know they rut here. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm not going to bounce around too much. I know he comes through this funnel. I know he checks this scrape. I know he's always around this doe bedding area. I'm going to sit every chance I get when the wind is right for this spot or this spot, and I'm just going to put my time in. And a lot of times I kill him there. A lot of times I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, there he is. He's over there. And I might get down and adjust and kill him over there the next day or something. You know, it just varies. But
Right.
maybe that kind of paints a picture of
Hell yeah.
how I'm maybe more efficient. I think the fact that I have not been able to hunt as much the last several years, you know, since my kid has been born, it's forced me to become more efficient. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be gone from my kid a lot. I don't want to be gone from Lisa a lot. I want to be home. I like being with them. Do I want to hunt more? Yes. Like, there's been some years in the past where I've hunted like 15 days, 12 days. It's not enough for me, man. It's not. But
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to, like, you know, maybe do an August hunt for antelope, or doing a June hunt for axis deer, or doing a spring bear hunt, or, you know, different things. January for mule deer or coos deer. Different things that kind of spread it out. I'm getting more hunting in. It's just not all whitetail. But the fact that I have had a limited schedule and I've kind of prioritized the family, it has led to less hunting. So I scout more, I prepare more, I gain confidence through preparing and through scouting and looking at these historical trends and moving in. Like you said, when I have that confidence, when I have that verification, or that trigger that gives me the confidence to move it and get something killed in a quick window. That's how I've been able to do that. So it's just it's kind of just a shift,
Yep.
you know, a different shift in your mindset and in your preparation and how you spend your time. I still spend a lot of time with hunting stuff. I spend less time hunting. I still shoot just
Mm-hmm.
about every day. I still scout a ton. But I'm choosing to do it most of the time in between, you know, practices and games and family stuff. And it's just stuff I don't want to miss, man. I just don't want to miss it. And I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm doing fine. I'm killing enough deer. I'm having a good time. But I'm looking forward to, in a few years, when my daughter graduates, and I'm going to be able to spend like a week in a spot. Like, I've never been able to do that, you know? So, you know, I'm looking forward to that. Like, more hunts, doing, you know, kind of focusing, is prioritizing me a little more. It'll come. My day will come. But right now, I got to be as efficient as possible and just do what I can. And, you know, right now it's good enough.
Hell yeah, dude. And the aspect that I love that you touched upon in all this was that not only is it physically, but it's also mentally. And that's key. And that's a big thing that I also have tried to get better at and be more efficient at is the mental side of things, and as well as that physical side of things as well with that. So Andy, kind of the last question to kind of wrap things up, man. If you could think back to either like a success or a failure, even in the last like 2 years on a hunt, like was there something so simple that happened where you're just like, I can't believe that pulled off, or I can't believe I didn't do that? What, you know, is there something that you could maybe think about that, like with such a quick question like that you're like, man, that I can't believe that worked out on that hunt?
Well, nothing really surprises me anymore what does work out. Like, I've kind of developed like a very, I guess, I guess you'd call it like a versatile style. So I do a lot of things that are out of the box that
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of learned, and, you know, from other people, or maybe, you know, speared the interest started from other people, and then I learned through experience, like the ground hunting, using the decoy, using like the mobile decoy, still hunting with my bow. Like, all of these things I've done with success, and all these things I've failed a million times. It doesn't really surprise me when those things work out. There just might be a little more rare or rewarding when those happen. They're a little more
Mm-hmm.
exciting, some of them. But what, I guess I'd answer it the other way. The past few years, when I look at my screw ups, you know, deer I've missed, deer I've hit in the shoulder. Like, a few years ago, there's a big Michigan buck. I, you know, pretty much had my heart set on him. snuck in on the ground, set up on the ground, kind of stacked some brush in front of me. I was basically in a makeshift ground blind in a funnel where I knew he came through. It was that same tactic I was just telling you about. I knew he was in there during the rut, and this is a funnel he comes through regularly. And I went in there with the right wind, set up on the ground. Didn't even want to risk getting up in a tree and making any noise. Because he could have been close out on this peninsula. And here he comes, just like I wanted. And took a shot at him at 20 yards and hit him right in the shoulder. And I ended up killing him late season with my bow, which was very rewarding. He's awesome. One of my favorite bucks. But when I look back at that one, I look back at, a couple that I've missed. It's always been just a little overconfidence in shot selection or rushing through that process a little bit. And I don't want it to make it sound like I have target panic, because I'm not like punching the trigger off like uncontrollably. No, I'm actually executing a really nice shot. But that little window where you get from here, aim, and then you start your execution, that little space right there, I'm rushing through that before I'm actually ready to shoot. So maybe it is almost a little bit of a form of target panic. It seems like when I've messed up, it's been that. I did that on that animal. I did it on a few other ones. Hit them high, miss them, trying to rush it a little bit. Didn't let everything calm down to make a good, clean shot. So I actually wrote that down at the end of last year. Like, slow your process down. Work on reducing that heart rate and better shot selection. Those were the three things that I wrote that I thought would make the biggest difference moving forward, going off like the last 2 years. That's where right now, that's where my weakness is. That's what it is. Well, I'm the hinge is helping me work through that a little. I'm practicing my shots like that. I'm visually imagining that buck's, coming through. He's chasing a doe, and I have to grunt, burp, and I'm at full draw. And that's a situation, right? Like, you want to get that arrow gone because, like, how long is he really going to stand there? But I'm actually forcing myself just to wait, just that extra second, like 1 second. Sometimes that's all it takes, just to burrow that pin right where you want it and just let it float. And then a nice smooth execution. And it makes all the difference in the world. When I can do that, good things happen.
Yep.
Really good things happen. And when I don't do that, sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen. So I'm just trying to eliminate those bad things. But that's probably the thing that stands out the most for me. And it's kind of something that I haven't really heard people talk about. You hear about target panic, but you're thinking more like drive-by shooting, punching the trigger, getting so worked up and like, doing this and then boom. That's what I see a lot of guys do, on TV, and a lot of your friends do, but this is something different. I'm never punching the trigger. It's more just rushing through, quickening up my process when I don't really need to quick it up. I need to slow it down.
Yeah, dude. 100%. Andy, man, this was awesome. And I think the take home message too with this is, with no matter what you're doing, challenge yourself this summer as you go through and prepare for this upcoming season. Challenge yourself, but keep things simple. Just don't overcomplicate it, and challenge yourself physically and challenge yourself mentally. And I think just like Andy said, some good things can happen. Andy, man, I honestly, I can't thank you enough. This was selfishly, this is a big bucket list for me, man, to have you on, and I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day, of your June 10th day, man, and I appreciate that so much, Andy.
Oh man, no problem. My pleasure. Sorry we couldn't do it sooner. It was fun. Good conversation.
Dude, absolutely. All right, everybody, go check Andy out. Obviously, check him out, Bowhunting Dad on Instagram, and a bunch of other places where you'll see his stuff. Spartan Forge, obviously Tethered as well. Sometimes you'll see him doing things with Tony and Mark over at the Meat Eater crew. So make sure you go check him out, and we'll see you next week, everybody. Antler up.